Oh, you figured out how to cut the logo. It looks very nice.
Oh, thank you. We're just gonna hold off for one more minute until I think we have everyone here. Okay, let's get started. Right. So welcome everybody to the Weeks of Learning and Doing Omer webinar series 2024. This webinar is Eat Like a Sage, Insights on Diet and Cooking from Biblical to Rabbinic Times. And all right. Second, while I find all my things. Got it. All right. So welcome again, everybody. This is our 7th webinar in the Weeks of Learning and Doing webinar series, and it's hosted by the Masorti Environmental Sustainability Initiative, or MESI. And with a generous grant from Keren Kayemet LiYisrael, MESI was launched on Tu B'Shvat this year to promote living sustainably and taking action to fight climate change within the conservative movement's institutions. MESI's first step was to enhance the conservative movement's partnership with Adama's Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition. This is a program that supports synagogues in their efforts to create their own climate action plans. And to date, we have almost 70 Masorti congregations registered. MESI also collaborated with rabbis and scholars to create a unique set of weekly insights and teachings on sustainability that enhance our celebration of the Omer. And you can find those in the Omer section. Sign up for them on exploringjudaism.org. And now the Weeks of Learning and Doing webinar series, which is taking place. We started right after Pesach and we go until right before Shavuot. These webinars are inspired by the same disciplines we're using in our weekly Omer teachings: learning, service, and loving kindness. The webinar series is a highly curated movement-wide online event that offers education, information, and resources about environmental sustainability from a Jewish perspective. And some examples of our webinars are capital planning from an environmental perspective, helping to ensure a healthy world, the mitzvah of Yishuv HaOlam, and cultivating spiritual courage and confronting the climate crisis, and the one we'll hear today. MESI has partnered with various arms of the conservative movement and some fabulous external partners like JIFA and Rabbi Joseph to offer this one-of-a-kind webinar series about the environment and climate change that will inspire and motivate action and advocacy. We hope it will inspire and motivate you to enhance your sustainability actions and commitments to protect planet Earth, our common home. And now I'd like to introduce our fabulous speakers. Based in Los Angeles, Rabbi Jonathan Bernhard is an ordained conservative rabbi who served a wonderful congregation for 25 years before deciding it was time for something different. He is now the executive director of the Jewish Initiative for Animals, an organization dedicated to helping make the Jewish community more plant-based. And he's also the co-founder of Valley Chevra Kadisha, a community Chevra Kadisha in the San Fernando Valley. In addition to being crazy about English Premier League soccer, he fosters mama dogs and their puppies, raises chickens, and plays the ukulele badly. His words, not mine. He has a thing about green burials as well. He and his wife, Lori, have 3 grown sons, 3 smallish dogs, and 4 noisy chickens, which he says we might actually hear in the background. Our second speaker today is Rabbi Rebecca Joseph. She's a culinary director at Congregation Olam Tikva in Fairfax, Virginia, and she began cooking professionally at age 19. As chef and owner of San Francisco's award-winning 12 Tribes, She introduced the farm-to-table ethos and social justice practices to kosher catering. She has cooked for political and religious luminaries in the Jewish world, as well as kosher-keeping guests of Michelin-starred restaurants. Rabbi Joseph's Shabbat and holiday meals in San Francisco, and before that in New York, are legendary. Her food writing and recipes have appeared in winespectator.com, Jay, The Forward, Shema, and others. Her blog, The Parv Baker, was one of the first to connect recipes and Torah. The Rabbi's Table, her forthcoming book, draws on more than 10 years of researching rabbinic gastronomy. Rabbi Joseph was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary. She also holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of California, San Diego, and was a postdoc research fellow at UC Berkeley. As a Fulbright Fellow in Indonesia, she learned how to make tempeh delicious and create light corn fritters and spicy fried rice. She also learned that, like making great latkes, shaping festive candies from grated coconut and sugar is a lot harder than it looks. I don't know, that sounds really hard to me. Now, just quickly, a little bit about this webinar. Rabbi Bernhard will speak about the biblical understanding of humanity's relationship with other species with whom we share this world. And Rabbi Joseph will share material illustrating rabbinic preferences for limiting meat consumption, including a few suggestions for how to eat like a vegetable-loving sage. She'll also include a link to 2 plant-based seasonal recipes with ingredients mentioned in the Gemara for you to make at home. And I'll put that in the chat as well for all of you to download. And now I'll turn the floor over to Rabbi Bernhard.
Good morning, good afternoon, and depending on where you're calling from, good evening, everybody. I'm still muted. Oh, sorry. There we go. It is a pleasure. Did everybody hear my beginning? Yeah, okay, just checking. All right. So it is a pleasure to be able to be here to share some words of Torah and to talk about the importance of diet from the point of view of the Bible and through rabbinic tradition. Before we do that, before we study, it's my custom, especially when studying text, just to offer up a blessing for Torah study. The blessing goes, Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanus, or that classic line. And then it's la'asok b'divrei Torah, which literally, and I happen to love the literal translation here, means get busy with Torah. Which I think is I just love that notion of what do you do with Torah? You get busy with it. So if you're comfortable and you know the words, please feel free to join in with me. If not, I invite you to say amen afterwards if you're comfortable with that as we begin our Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We acknowledge you, God, as the source of all life, grateful for opportunities to come together, to learn and to grow and to bring more holiness into this world. Amen. All righty, so in a discussion about sustainability, as this program is, one might ask oneself, if we're talking sustainability, if we're talking climate, why are we having a conversation about diet? In what way does diet play into this? And many of you may know the connection, but just to make it really explicit, in the world in which we live in right now, in the climate challenges and crisis that we're facing, there are many elements to it, and there are many elements that need to be addressed. But among the things that need to be addressed, if we are to address our climate crisis, are our diets. And just to give you one very simple stat, just so people kind of conceive of this, if we were to do everything right with energy, if we were to go totally electric, if we were wind and solar and water and rain, whatever kind of power, all good power, if we were to change all of that stuff and do nothing with our diets, we would still break the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold that we're trying to keep under. Which is to say that in order to manage our climate, we simply have to be able to talk about diets. And by the way, I'm not being prescriptive when I talk about diets. I'm just saying we have to have a conversation about it. And a good place to start a conversation is to actually look at what the Torah says about our diets. And so what I'm going to do is just share a couple of verses from the Bible, from Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 9, just to kind of set a framework for how the Torah understood a basic element of our diet, and in a sense, try to set it up there for Rabbi Becky to take it home and show how the rabbis actually take some of this stuff and applied it. So I'm just going to begin by sharing the screen. Okay, so can everyone see Genesis chapter 1, verse 26? Right. Yeah, for those of you who don't have your screen on, you have to put a thumbs up in the chat if I'm going to know anything. I just want you to know. Okay, so just want to begin by looking at how the Torah understands our relationship with other species. And that really begins with Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, which says the following. Then God said, let us make a human, Adam, in our image, in our likeness, so they may, and here I actually took a little liberty with the verb, it's yirdu, but it can be translated as, so they may rule, hold sway, or tend over the fish in the sea, the fowl of the heavens, over the cattle and the wild beasts, over all the crawling things that crawl upon the earth. So very famous line, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Rabbis, we love to quote this line all the time because it talks about being B'Tselem Elohim. It talks about being created in the image of the divine, right? So we quote this verse continually when we're trying to understand both our own innate holiness as well as how we're meant to relate to others in this world. What I would like to focus on, though, is not that part, but the next part that says, so they may. And here it says, so they may rule, hold sway, or tend over, right? And this is a verse of some controversy because the question becomes, what does it mean to rule over? And here I just want to tap into something that we as Americans tend to not be so comfortable with, which is our images of monarchy, right? When we tend to think of ruling and of kings, positive connotation or negative connotation, what do we think? This would be the interactive part if you want to interact. Nobody wants to interact. Okay, so when we think of monarchy, we tend to think negatively, right? We don't think positively as kings as Americans. We rebelled against kings and queens. We left all of that. But in the biblical world, monarchs were good. The rulers were seen in a positive light. And the ultimate ruler was God. And what was God's role as ruler? What did it mean to rule when you're a king? It means, from the biblical point of view, to take care of, to tend to. And so here in the Bible, when it says we're created in the divine image, right, so we may tend to these other creatures with whom we share this world, what the Torah is implying is that to the extent that we tend well to these creatures, we increase the divine within us. To the extent that we do not tend well with these creatures, we decrease the divine. And I say tend because here we understand we do not own the other species of this world, right? We're obligated, on the contrary, because we're made in the image of the divine, to care for and tend to them. So that's the first verse I just wanted to put out there just to begin kind of getting a feel for how Jewish tradition looks at our relationship with other species. Really quick, any questions about that verse before I go on to the next one? Good? Okay. Oops. Why did you not that? So the next verse comes from towards the end of the chapter, just a few verses later, Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, verse and 30. So here we see the first mention of the biblical diet. So this is a good place to start talking about diets. And this is what it said. And God said, look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the earth and every tree that has fruit-bearing seed. Yours they will be for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the fowl of the heavens and to all that crawls on the earth, which has the breath of life within it, the green plants for food. Okay, so from this point of view, from the biblical point of view, from starting here, the biblical diet has all human beings being what? And here I'm going to make someone say it out loud. Come on, people. According to the Bible, at least at first, human beings were
Vegetarian.
I see. That's what everyone says. Everyone says vegetarian, and Susan, to an extent, you're right. However, it's actually even more than vegetarian, right? Because what do they eat? They eat plants. They're not just vegetarian people, they're plant-based. They're vegan. Quite remarkable. Quite remarkable that from the biblical point of view, the original diet was vegan. However, I just also want to point out that it's not only the human beings who are meant to be vegan. Who else is meant to be vegan in the worldview of the Torah?
The animals as well.
Right? Everybody, every living creature that crawled on the earth, that flew in the heavens, that swims in everybody was meant to be vegan, right? And this leads some people to say, clearly Judaism and the Torah is meant to be a vegan tradition. And this leads other people to actually say, no, it can't be a vegan tradition. What we're talking about here is not diet per se alone, but also a view about violence and sustaining oneself through violence and the causing of pain to others, other sentient creatures, right? That might be what's at play here. And the Torah has this vision of a world in which there is no violence on the part of any living creature in order to sustain itself. Right? Rather radical point of view. Right? But this is, at least from the Torah's beginning, where all of life begins. All of life begins by sustaining itself as plant-based. However, we also know that this will change over time. Oh, wait, before I go on, any other questions on this text? Just curious, how many people had heard before the text that both humans and all other animals were vegan? I'm just curious how well known or obvious that is. I don't know how else to say it. Yes, no? People knew? People heard that before? Okay. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. So, for those of you who knew it, then you know it's going to change. For those of you who didn't know it, then you're going to be a little bit surprised at the change that's about to come. And here's the change. The change comes in chapter 9. So from the Torah's point of view, from chapter 1 up through chapter 9, all of life was meant to sustain itself in nonviolent ways, not relying on other creatures, but relying only on plants and vegetation to sustain itself. In chapter 9, it changes. And here's what it says. In chapter 9, it says, "Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And the dread and fear of you shall be upon all the beasts of the field and all the fowls of the heaven, and on all that crawls on the ground and all the fish in the sea. Into your hands they are given. All stirring things that are alive, yours shall they be for food. Like the green plants, I have given all to you. But the flesh with its lifeblood still in it, you shall not eat. And just so your lifeblood I will requite from every beast, I will requite it, and from humankind, from every person's brother, I will requite life." So here is the shift in the biblical point of view. It is at this point and this point on where, from the Torah's point of view, human beings are allowed to consume other animals in the same way that they consumed plants. Torah is very explicit about it. So I have 3 questions, though, that I want to put out there and explore together. So the first is, what do you think happened between Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 9, right? It's such a shocking change. It's such a clear evolution. What occurred? The flood.
Well,
Yeah, Susan.
well, I believe this is after the flood.
Right.
And so you have certain generations having expanded because there's some generations between Adam and Noah.
Right.
And God has had a chance to observe, if we could say it this way, how his first request that we be vegan has morphed or materialized into something completely different, which led to the flood. And then because there is a need to be fruitful and multiply, just like Adam, we hear that through Urvu,
Right.
like we see at the very beginning during the days of creation, we've lost all these years of multiplying and filling the earth. So there's a dramatic need for a small group to be fruitful and multiply. And so there's probably also the perception here that God has observed how people fed themselves. And so through godly wisdom, one could say the realization that only asking for vegan lifestyle may not materialize, that the divine spirit in man may not be ready for such a demand or such a level of existence.
Right. And actually, interestingly enough, it is Rav Harav Isaac, I think it's first Harav Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, who's going to articulate a vision of vegetarianism similar to what you said, talking about sort of people's spiritual level and readiness for it. Right. Another way of conceiving it and reframing it would be between Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden and Noah, you had this breakdown. The Torah talks about this breakdown of society. And it's really interesting because the Torah first talks about all of life sustaining itself in a non-violent way. But what is the thing that the Torah says about the generation of the flood? What did they do? What had they brought into the world? How did they corrupt the world? They corrupted it by bringing in, and this is not a political term, this did not have the political meaning that it has now, Hamas. Right? The Torah is explicit, right? People bring Hamas, which in this case is violence, right? They bring violence into the world, right? So it shouldn't escape our attention, right? In terms of diet evolution, that you go from being plant-based, right? You have this experience of violence, and then, and only then, God says, okay, you know what? I'm going to allow you to eat meat. And even then, there's a huge, huge restriction that's laid. It's like the permission is given, but immediately, right? It's like, yeah, you can do this, but, and I know this seems weird to us. We look at, if you kill an animal, you've kind of taken its life from it. Whereas from the biblical perspective, the life really resides within the blood. And so while taking the life of another animal is permissible, taking its lifeblood, right, its very core, its very essence, utterly forbidden. And so we see even when Judaism is giving the permission, or what I would say is giving the concession to eat meat, it immediately limits it. And this brings me to the last question I'm going to ask before I turn things over to Rabbi Becky, and that's this. And here I'm going to stop sharing the screen. So I want to ask the following question. A society that goes, or that sees itself as having, if you will, an ideal of plant-based eating as in the garden, but then concedes because for human need, however we want to understand that, the desire to eat meat, right, and gives permission to eat meat, the society that goes in that direction, is this a society that's going to want you to eat a lot of meat or not? What do you think? What do you think would be the pound? Just kind of think creatively. It's like, oh, we're given the chance to eat meat 3 times, 3 square meals a day. I'm going to have meat. Is that the society, or is it the society that evolves this way? Is this going to be a society that says, only on occasion, maybe once or twice a month? Like, what would you imagine? How would you think it might evolve?
Well,
Yes. Hetty?
Slowly. I think it wouldn't go so quickly, but just slowly. I don't know about once or twice a month, but
Right. Like from this perspective, right? You wouldn't imagine what I hear you saying, Hetty, is you wouldn't imagine this is a society where meat eating is all sort of like the thing everyone's doing all of a sudden.
no.
All righty. So if it's a society that's going to develop it, it's going to develop it slowly. Any other thoughts?
I wonder if it's going to take time to understand how to cook the meat, how to eat the meat, what to do with all of the different parts, how to understand what's the right size animal to consume.
Right. Civilization's going to take a lot of time figuring those things out and continually figuring them out. Those things continually evolve. What are the parts you eat? What are the parts you don't eat? In some cases, which are the animals you can eat? Which are the animals you can't eat? Right? Societies like all evolve along those lines. So I want to throw out the following: that this is a society that I think we're going to see that when you eat meat, it's sacred. Right? If you're going to eat meat, it's special. Right? That is the point that I would say, no matter how many times you eat it, or the circumstances. I'm not even talking about when one does it. But to this society, one understands that this conception, especially with the limitation, is one that takes the consuming of other animals incredibly, incredibly seriously. And with that, in terms of how then Rabbinic Judaism takes that dynamic and then makes it real, turn things over to my colleague. Thank y'all very much. Pleasure to be able to share some time with y'all.
Hey everyone, it is so nice to be with you, and I thank you so much for joining us today. I am going to pick up on that very important question that Rabbi Bernhard posed to us about what is this society going to say about consuming meat. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about the project that I've been working on to give you some context. I have been involved in a study of what I call rabbinic gastronomy for 10 or more years now. And people often ask me, well, what is it and why study it? And gastronomy is the practice or the art of choosing and cooking and eating good food. It's as simple as that. Um, and I got very interested in this. Part of it comes out of my love of studying rabbinic literature. Part of it comes out of my my love and interest in preparing food. But really, where this came from was there was a point at which I realized that the way in which many food historians, Jewish and non-Jewish, describe Jewish food is really fundamentally flawed. For example, Clifford A. Wright, who's a James Beard Award-winning cookbook author and food historian, has written, in Jewish dietary laws, kashrut, we get a glimmer of the boundaries of the cuisines of the Jews in relations to their countries. In fact, if we can properly speak of a Jewish cuisine, we can do so only by virtue of the fact that it developed as a result of kashrut. In other words, there's really no such thing as Jewish cuisine. The only thing notable about the way Jews prepare food and eat food is kashrut. And there are many Jewish food writers who should know better, who also subscribe to some version of this. Jews lived in many places. All they had was kashrut, and so they adopted local recipes to be kosher. And I was, as a chef and also as someone who is seriously interested in rabbinic literature, I was pretty sure that was not the case. And so that's how I got into doing this work. And I'm going to share a little bit of it with you today. And it's really a little bit of a little bit. I'm going to talk with you about what the rabbis of the Babylonian Talmud have to say about the desirability of eating meat. And for some of us, when we hear this kind of discussion, the first thing that comes to mind is what the contemporary author Michael Pollan said some years ago now: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That more or less is the short answer to the supposedly incredibly complicated and confusing question to what we humans should eat to be maximally healthy. Here's the thing, that is true. However, Michael Pollan was not the first person to discover this. There are many similar statements in the Talmud. For example, Rav Huna, who has quite a lot to say about all things gastronomic, is reportedly said, any city that does not have vegetables, a Torah scholar is not permitted to live there. So for those of us who consider ourselves, the term that he uses is Talmid Chacham. So any of us who consider ourselves to be in the world of Torah scholars or aspiring Torah scholars, take note. You may not live anywhere where there are no vegetables. And there are numerous other statements like that as well. The two texts that I'd really like to talk about primarily right now, also from the Babylonian Talmud. There are other texts and other treatises, but the two that I want to talk about today, one comes from Masachet Tractate Chulin, and it's a very interesting text. For those who are familiar with the way in which the rabbis treat certain other biblical allowances, if not prescriptions, you may hear a similar pattern when we think of how the rabbis approach capital punishment, how they approach the Ben Sorer Moreh, the rebellious son, and how they approach the accusation and ordeal of the sota. You may hear echoes of that in how they're going to approach meat eating here. So in this particular passage, what they start out by saying is that we should eat meat rarely so that it doesn't become habitual. That's the first step. And the way that they go about making that argument is to say that the Torah requires us to cover the blood of an animal that we have hunted and killed for food. And they go through an argument in which they conclude that if you're going to eat meat, it should be an animal that you yourself have hunted. So that's step one. And that would, as you can imagine, severely limit, or certainly most of us, the amount of meat that we are eating. But really, the takeaway from this is don't eat meat very often. So then they come with another argument, and they say, well, once you're living in Eretz Yisrael, you can eat meat, but only if you crave it. So that's different from saying I have meat in my refrigerator. There's meat at the supermarket. I'll make some meat, or I make meat every Tuesday. So I'll have some meat, but only if you crave it should you be eating meat. So that's the second part. The third argument that they make is, well, you should only eat meat from an animal that you yourself have raised. And that's a little more lenient than only eating meat from an animal that you've hunted, or if you crave meat. But there's a further restriction, which is that you may not kill all of your animals for their meat. So if you have only one cow or only one sheep, you can't slaughter that animal for meat. And if you have, say, a small herd, you can't slaughter the entire herd at the same time because, for example, you're putting on a wedding. So that's a further limitation on meat eating. The final way that they go about limiting meat consumption is basically meat is costly. And so this is for the person or the household that is going out to buy meat from a market or from a butcher. And so I'm going to read to you the whole little passage because I think the way that they go about it is very rich and really fascinating. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, one who has 100 dinars should purchase a litra of vegetables for his stew pot. A litra is about 3/4 of a pound, a rabbinic litra. So this is just to give you some sense of how much we're talking about here. And so, and one who has 1,000, 10 times as much money, should purchase a litra of fish for his stew pot. One who has 5,000 dinars, so that's 5 times as much again, should purchase a litra of meat for his stew pot. So that's 3/4 of a pound of meat. That's like a small package of ground beef for your whole stew pot. So clearly, what else is going to be in the stew pot besides the sauce? Legumes, vegetables, other things, but not animal products. Just a small little bit. And if one has 10,000 dinars, his servants should place a pot of meat on the stove for him every day. Very few people are going to have that kind of wealth. Mostly they are going to be kings and other elites, including some of the rabbis like Rav Huna. And so the rabbis come back and they ask, well, you know, if only very wealthy people should eat meat, and even say what we might call upper middle class folks should only be eating 3/4 of a pound of it, well, what about everybody else? You know, how often should they be eating meat? And the rabbi's answer is on Shabbat, on Erev Shabbat, at the Shabbat dinner meal. But the thing that's really interesting about this is that elsewhere in the Talmud, and certainly among the later commentators, this is not a directive that everybody must eat meat. It is a preference for eating meat only on the evening of Shabbat, but it is not a directive. It's not a law or a mitzvah that everybody must do so. And both the Talmud and later commentators are quite explicit that if you don't eat meat, that's just fine because you don't want to eat it, you don't like it, whatever it is, that what is important is that the food that you prepare is in honor of Shabbat. And so I think that this is a really, it's both an expansive description of how we should consider approaching meat. And it has, I think, to my mind, many parallels with these other cases that I mentioned earlier, where we have something that is either commanded or permitted in Torah that the rabbis are ambivalent at the best about, or maybe just plain outright uncomfortable. And so they find various ways to limit the practice rather than saying it's prohibited, but to limit it in a way that it's not going to happen all that often. The other text that they actually go a step further, and the other text that I would just like to share with you very briefly here comes from Tractate Sanhedrin, and this is a really interesting passage as well. Rabbi Yochanan asks about the meaning of a verse from the book of Proverbs. And that verse is, the curse of the Lord is in the house of the wicked, but he blesses the habitation of the just. And so the question is, what does this mean? And here's the story that the rabbis share. It's about a man named Pekach, who is the son of Ramaliah. And they say that he would eat 40 seah of doves. 40 seah of doves is about 500 pounds. Okay, that's a lot of doves. But he would eat 40 seah of doves for dessert and still not be full. And then the second part, he blesses the habitation of the just. The rabbis say is a reference to Hezekiah, who was the king of Judea, who would eat a litra, remember that's 3/4 of a pound of vegetables at his meal, and was full. And so what I think my takeaway from this is that what the rabbis are teaching us is that overconsumption, it's not just good to limit your consumption of meat, but overconsumption of meat is not just unhealthy, it's wicked. And that non-consumption of meat, having a plant-based diet is blessed, even for people who have the wealth to be able to eat every day like the king of Judea. So I want to just end here with a passage that I hope you'll spend some time thinking about. I want to ask you, what do you think we can learn from this particular passage beyond what is the correct blessing to say before eating animal-based foods? And this is from Tractate Brachot. The sages taught over a food item whose growth is not from the earth, for example, meat from domesticated animals, non-domesticated animals, and fowl and fish, one recites, Shehakol Nihavidvaru. So by whose word all things came to be. So too, over milk and over eggs and over cheese, one recites Shehakol. But that in and of itself is very interesting, that there is not a specific blessing for either meat or dairy, that it comes into this kind of catch-all category. But the thing that is really stunning is they don't stop there. What they say is this is not only true regarding items that come from animals, but over, and please pay close attention to what I'm going to say next, but over moldy bread, and over wine that has fermented slightly. So it's not vinegar, it's just bad wine. And over a cooked dish that spoils, one recites Shehakol. And so I'm going to stop there and would love to open up the conversation to all of you. Thank you so much again for joining me in a little bit of rabbinic gastronomy study today.
Thank you both so much for these really interesting insights into Torah and gastronomy. Rabbi Joseph, could you tell us a little bit about the recipes that we're going to share with the participants? Because I think you have a lot of stories behind these recipes that I think are worth mentioning.
Oh, well, thank you. Sure, I'm happy to do that. I'm delighted to share 2 recipes with you today from the book that I'm working on, and they are plant-based recipes. One calls for a little bit of honey, but if you prefer to substitute some other kind of plant-based sweetener, that's fine too. They are both created from ingredients that are mentioned in rabbinic literature. I do have a note on one of them that there is one exception, which is lemons. Lemons were not introduced into the region until the 1st century of the Common Era, and they were imported from India at the time. Eretz Israel was under Roman occupation, and they were imported across Eretz Israel to Rome. They were rare luxury products, and they're not mentioned anywhere in the early rabbinic literature, which suggests that, you know, even the wealthiest of the sages either didn't know about them or they didn't have access to them. But they did have access to etrogim, but if anybody's ever tried to make juice from an etrog, yeah, exactly. So I did use zest and juice from a lemon in one of the recipes. There's a little passage from the Talmud with each one of them that also gives you some background on how the rabbis thought about these particular foods. So I hope you'll try them at home. They're designed to be easy to prepare. They are seasonal, include some spring vegetables and barley. It is the season. So please enjoy them.
Great. I'm trying to put it in the chat now, so we can continue the conversation while I work on that. Does anyone have any questions for Rabbi Bernhard or Rabbi Joseph? The floor is open. Yes, Hetty, please.
So I have a question. First, I want to commend both of the speakers for the insightful and interesting messages. So my bottom line question is, how can rabbis ignore that animal-based diets violate at least 6 fundamental Jewish values? That is to take care of our health, treat animals with compassion, protect the environment, conserve natural resources, reduce hunger, and pursue peace. And especially taking into account now where the world's heating up so much about climate change, that animal-based diets are the main cause of climate change because animals emit methane, a very potent greenhouse gas. And even more important, that as we speak, the tropical rainforest being destroyed, so we're replacing land, trees that have been absorbing carbon dioxide with animals emitting that methane. And actually 43% of the ice-free land in the world is now used for grazing of animals and growing feed crops. And because of that, carbon dioxide has been skyrocketing. It's way above what the climate actually think is safe. So again, why are rabbis, others ignoring this when, again, there's so many negatives on Jewish values and really destroying the world and the health of Jews and others.
Great. Thank you so much for your question.
Oops. I'll be glad to take that one as a first go. And what I would say, and Richard, it is great to see you. It's great to continue to be able to learn with you. How do rabbis ignore? Honestly, it's really not that hard, right? And it's not just rabbis. It's rabbis and congregants, and it's actually not just rabbis, congregants, and Jews. It's all people, right? One of the things I think that one should never underestimate, and we have constant reminders of this, is of our ability to simply see the world the way we choose to, right? So it's not so much how can people do this? The question is, well, it's not so much why do people do it, it's what are the mechanisms that allow people to constantly not see what's going on right in front of them. And that afflicts everybody. Rabbis are no different than anybody else.
Hetty, you had a question?
Yes, I did. First of all, thank you for doing all of this. And just a quick, in a little bit of a response to Rabbi Richard Schwartz, after having studied all of this of climate change and whatever, we have changed over the decades in how we deal with food and processing and animals and all of that. I think it used to be a lot simpler, and I don't think it was an issue way back even 30 years ago or 70 years ago. But with all these changes in how we plant and how we have all these animals and what we do, I think that's what's created our climate change now. That's just my humble opinion from just studying this over a short time. But and I think they are trying to find ways, including the Farm Bill that's in Congress now, that every 5 years they went over it since the Dust Bowl, and every 5 years they were supposed to vote on it, and they didn't last year. So now it's all up front now for them to do it to alleviate some of this. So, things will be better. But my question before was at what point and how I understand about the animals and the animals that you could only hunt and whatever was described before, but how did they come to write which animals and all of that in the Torah? Just a question.
You mean just simply explain 4,000 years of kashrut in a minute?
That's good.
Okay, so I don't know, Rabbi Joseph, if you want to take a crack at this one. I'm I'm glad to say the following. It's longer than the time we have, right? And it's no different than any other culture. Every culture has its version of what it considers to be fit, kosher to eat or not, right? That developed for a variety of reasons. There's no one underlying principle that ties together the whole system. It evolved over time, and it's continuing to evolve, right? The work that I do at the Jewish Initiative for Animals and with our partners at Jewish Veg is to try to make the Jewish community more plant-based and to help institutions and individuals go down that path, because that's our take on, how it is that we can come in right alignment, what is fit to eat and what's a proper balance, apropos to some of the things that Richard was saying. So I think these things are continually developing. It's hard to give super short answer, as I just proved.
I'd like to share a comment from the chat, which is our rabbi is vegan. We continue to eat meat at congregational meals, but because so many people are vegan or vegetarian as well, we are more cognizant of our congregational needs. And I wonder how much any of you resonate with that. I know that at my synagogue, it's just easier to be more vegetarian focused and certainly dairy focused. And I wonder if you're finding as well that your congregations are paying more attention in this way as well. And maybe Rabbi Bernhard, Rabbi Joseph, that's something you can also chime in on what you've seen with the congregations that you work with.
I can talk a little bit as the culinary director here at Olam Tikva about what we do here. We have a congregation with more than 700 households, and we serve to the entire congregation a full buffet lunch every Shabbat, with the exception of during Pesach and between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. All together with all the different kinds of meals that we prepare in the synagogue, we recently did this calculation. We prepare about 60,000 meals a year. It sounds like a lot, and it's because we have a very busy and active congregation, and as in many congregations, food is very important to how we bring people together, how we socialize, and like that. What we do for the events that I oversee is that what I'm always trying to do, and I'm putting a menu together, is to think about if there are, we usually have depending on what's going on Shabbat, we can have between 200 and 350 people for lunch. And within that group, there are going to be people with all kinds of dietary preferences and also restrictions. And so my goal always is to be cognizant of that. And I want everybody to be able to come and have a full lunch, whether they eat everything that is on the buffet or not. But I want everybody who chooses to, whatever their restrictions are, and some of them are medical restrictions and some of them are personal preferences and choices, to come and really be able to have a satisfying lunch. Now, they just may not like a certain kind of food, but that I can't do anything about. And so what that means is, I'm very conscious about where we include meat, where we include dairy. Most of the things that we serve are vegan by default because that allows the greatest number of people to enjoy them. And for every meal, we have menus that identify dish by dish, dairy or meat or fish, but also gluten-free and vegan options so that people know before they even get to the platter or the bowl, what kinds of ingredients are used. And more recently, we have also added an Israeli flag in a little heart to items that have their origins in Israel.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Bernhard and Rabbi Joseph. We're coming to the end of the hour, so I'm going to need to wrap it up. I want to first let you all know that the recipes that Rabbi Joseph was speaking about, I was unable to put them in the chat. So when I send you all the recording, I'll include the PDF with those beautiful recipes. And I just want to thank both Rabbi Bernhard and Rabbi Joseph for taking the time today to share with us their commitments to the work that they're doing around food and environmentalism and sustainability and education and Torah. And I'm really grateful that we got to hear this conversation and for all of your contributions to this important topic. And I hope as well that you were you sort of encouraged to start or keep going or even level up in your environmental actions around food. And I hope that the educational element was also supportive for you all. I found it absolutely fascinating. I just want to close by encouraging everybody to register and attend the 3 remaining incredible webinars in our Messy series. I'm putting them registration link in the chat right now, which has the rest of the webinars with their descriptions and the sign up. Our next webinar is, we have 2 more. Our next one takes place on Tuesday, June 4th, and it's called Jewish Advocacy, Courage in Action. And our final webinar in this one-of-a-kind series is being led by Rabbi Nina Beth Cardin and is called Helping to Ensure a Healthy World, the Mitzvah of Yishuv HaOlam. And I'd love to see you all there. And thank you so much for participating and being a part of our environmentally focused Judaism-infused webinars. If you have any questions, you'll receive the email from me. You can always respond. And if you have additional questions, let me know and I can forward them to Rabbi Bernhard and Rabbi Joseph as well. So thank you all so much for participating and for being here. We're grateful to you. And Rabbi Bernhard, Rabbi Joseph, you want to say anything?
Thank you. That was it.
Wonderful.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you both so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Shira, for bringing us all together and moderating and posting things in the chat for us and all the things that made this really terrific webinar happen.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.